and never would have imagined that 7, 8, 10-year-old D would have looked at it and been like, here I'm going to be playing for this team that I've loved all my life. But I studied hard. I played a decent amount of sports, and they gave me the opportunity because I was a student that was a pretty good athlete.
So joining me right now is the varsity cross country and varsity track coach from East Gaston, Coach Murray. But the real reason why I want to have you on has nothing to do with track or your it's more with your coaching abilities and how it connects to the classroom. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thank you for having me on.
So before we get to your current career and how coaching crosses over to your teaching, let's talk about you growing up. How did sports impact your life growing up?
Well, sports played a big part in my life. I started playing t-ball and participating as soon as I was able to. I'm old, so that it's not as young as it used to be, as it is now. I started around second grade playing t-ball and started playing baseball and everything. And then when I got into middle school, basketball and football came along the way, and so once I got up into the interscholastic sports and everything, if it was a sport, I was wanted to be a part of it. And so all through school, I participated in everything I possibly could. I was a four sport letterman in high school at the varsity level all 4 years. And I was fortunate enough to get to participate in college to some degree. Injuries kind of put that out of the way ultimately, but it did help me get my degree. And they were very impactful. My parents were very supportive. My family was very supportive. Um, but it did start to have a big impact and shape my life.
Is there a coach along your way that you feel like really impacted you that kind of kept you going?
Um, Honestly, the two coaches that probably had the biggest impact on me were my two t-ball coaches. And they were young teenage guys, fresh out of high school, going to college. They had kind of been last minute thoughts at the rec league that I was playing in. In my family situation, I was kind of I was what you would call an oops baby. My siblings were 10 and 15 years older than I was, my two sisters. So I was very fortunate in that growing up, I had lots of people around me all the time uh, that were very older and energetic. So about the time that I got into sports, my sisters were dating. And in the mid 70s, dating had a lot different look than it has now. There were always teenage guys over at my house. They were always willing to play whatever I wanted to play. We were always out in the yard throwing the ball around, playing football, tag football, basketball, shooting hoops, whatever. And so when I got involved with the rec league and these two young guys were coaching, the energy that they brought was so much different than what I saw with dads coaching their sons and my friends on these other teams. And so my first exposure to real coaching was totally different than a lot of my friends got. And so I think that is kind of an impact that has affected me in coaching along the way as I've grown in my career and going up. Specifically, coaches that have had an impact me along the way. In high school, I got to and was fortunate enough to be exposed to two predominantly and well, no, three legends in this area. If you've lived in this area for any amount of time, you know these three names: Jerry Faulkner, who was the basketball coach at Charlotte Latin for years and years and years. He actually served on the staffs of Dean Smith and Bill Murray at Clemson University in North Carolina. He was a great hands-on kind of guy. He helped me with my basketball while I was at Charlotte Latin, which is where I went to high school. I played football for Larry McNulty and Tommy Knotts, both two huge legends when it comes to the sport of football in this area. And they both had a huge impact on me from a football career standpoint, and probably sparked my interest. All three of those men taught me as much about knowing the game from a mental aspect as they did from playing the game, which is probably what led me to where I am now as being a coach, uh, as anything.
You mentioned the mental side of the game. I want to talk about that in 1 second, but I want to go back to you saying you had these young t-ball coaches, right? Do you feel like you
Right.
connected to them because your sisters had these boyfriends over? Like, do you feel like that was part of
Absolutely.
the connection? Yeah.
Absolutely. They were so, and it was almost like playing a pickup game that I was used to all the time. They were out there involved. It just felt different. It didn't feel like they were coaching me. They felt like they were playing with us every day. I just loved playing for them. And it was so different of a way that I had even seen my dad was involved in athletics because he was a school teacher. So I had seen coaching at that level at an early age. And it just was a different way. Truthfully, they probably didn't know what they were doing. And they were just winging it. They were going with their own personal experiences from having been coached. And here they were with all these 6 and 7-year-old boys trying to figure out how to play t-ball, which, as you know, is very chaotic in
Yep.
itself.
Yep.
And not only did they do a great job of it, but we were really good, and we were winning. Um, so uh, it just was I wish I could bottle it and explain it more, but it was I when I think back on it now, it was one. It would probably exciting to watch for my parents and friends and other families and things.
So let's go back. We go from t-ball, you get to high school. What was the goal for you when you were in high school? Like, what was the plan? Like, what did you want to do after high school?
My goal, honestly, I had no thoughts whatsoever about anything other than just going somewhere, getting a degree. I had always once I we moved from Charlotte to the Fort Mill area. My goal was I want to go to Clemson. I wanted to become an engineer, into the civil engineering area, maybe have a military career. Um, that was it. Sports became an avenue of enjoyment and release and that kind of thing. It was not much of anything other than that. Uh, so I was an above average athlete that was able. I was good at a lot of things. I wasn't great at anything, but in a lot of ways that worked to my advantage.
So how did that then turn into getting your degree paid for?
Um, I was very academically blessed. I worked to a very good high school. I was offered a preferred walk on
Okay.
at Clemson. They were able to give me the opportunity. Clemson gave me a lot of uh, scholarship money academically. I got all that taken care of. And so when I got the opportunity for the preferred walk on at Clemson under Danny Ford, I took the most of my opportunity, and I got on in a special teams position, and had a very good opportunity there. And never would have imagined that 7, 8, 10-year-old D would have looked at it and been like, "Here I'm going to be playing for this team that I've loved all my life." But I studied hard. I played a decent amount of sports, and they gave me the opportunity because I was a student that was a pretty good athlete. And at that point in time, they needed guys like me to fill out rosters, and that's what I was able to do for them.
At what point did you realize that you wanted to get into education?
Um, Later in my years at Clemson, when I figured out that calculus was not my subject, which is ironic because I'm a math teacher today.
Oh, yeah.
But when I figured out, yeah, when I figured out I couldn't really do calculus, and that if I couldn't pass calculus, I couldn't be an engineer. As my mother and father finally made me realize, I had to succumb to the family genes and be an educator, and that perhaps that's what I was meant to do. Um, and I had gotten involved, obviously, at Clemson. I had gotten involved in working with local schools and that kind of thing through the university. And I had started to realize that there was some fulfillment in working with younger children. I had done some coaching of my nephew's teams and those kinds of things during the summer in high school, and I started to realize that that connection between me and younger people was something that I really wanted, and so I made the transition into education, and honestly, I had no visions of really being anything more than a rec league thing with my future family and that kind of thing, and so I just went into elementary education. My family owned daycares at the time, and so I made the elementary education move and kind of saw myself there because, again, athletics had been an avenue to do something for me, but I never really saw this coaching avenue or where I am at today as where I was going to go. But educate it had helped with the education portion.
So now that you're in the teaching world, how do you see what you've done in coaching or what you've learned from coaching or what you've learned from sports? How does that connect like to your lessons that you're teaching daily?
Um, Honestly, the way what I do teaching math and everything else, particularly since I teach high school math now, um, and I teach math for the juniors and seniors, which is much more real world application. I'm able to take the coaching aspect of everything and really bring it into a situation of a lot of this is challenging. There's a lot of adversity. A lot of this requires not just one-on-one between the student and the work itself. We're going to have to. There's stuff that we need to work together on, particularly when they get into the real world with more technical math, or they're going into the certain industries and that kind of thing. It requires team effort. So, and that's kind of how I ended up being a coach in the first place. When I moved from elementary to middle school. Of course, coaches are difficult to find, particularly at the middle school level. My natural love of sports and everything made it very easy to to transition into coaching at that level. But I began to realize that for me, education of young people, the athletic field or the basketball court or wherever I was coaching is just another classroom. I spend very little time, particularly even now, doing actual athletic coaching. By the time they get to middle school and high school, they've got a lot of the skills. What you're doing at that point is you're refining the skills they have, and you're taking it and you're teaching them a lot of how to apply them into the whatever that life situation is that they're going to be using them, whether it's the mathematical skills they learned in elementary school or it's the athletic skills they learned at the rec league level. I'm taking them and I'm helping them hone them into those moments that they've reached now. So, math four every day, that's what we're doing. All the things they've learned early on, we're learning how to do that at a more complicated level and a more high aspect level. So that's where I started, or I've come to realize that all those things I learned, those challenges I faced, those times that I was with Coach Ford or Coach Fulton or Coach um, McNulty, and I was being put into situations where I was being forced to problem solve either by myself or with a teammate or multiple teammates. Um, these are the things that I need to now be helping these students learn.
So that's where I want to go next. So you mentioned the mental game earlier, and you talked about
Right.
adversity with the kids now. And like you mentioned that you're not really teaching them the skill anymore of you're refining the skill, either whether it's a sport or even in your math class. So like how do you break that adversity? So like I teach fourth grade, and one of the hardest things that I deal with as a fourth grade teacher is getting these kids to realize that there's going to be hard stuff that you encounter in life, and like you just can't quit. So how do you deal with adversity?
Well, my number one story to fall back on, and anybody that's a real sports fan or anything else has the greatest story at their hands to always fall back on, and that's Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is the greatest story of adversity to ever be used with a kid, because every kid knows who Michael Jordan is,
Yep.
particularly in this area. I mean, he's a part owner in the Hornets. He's a local product that's done it all. He's considered one of, if not the greatest basketball player in the world. But when you can look at a kid and go, yeah, he's got all that, but that kid didn't even make his basketball team his freshman year in high school.
Yep.
And they're like, yeah, he did. Well, no, he didn't. And you pull it up and you can show them the story and everything else, and you talk about that. And then you can just start reflecting on, well, yeah, but when he didn't make that, this is what he did. And he pushed through and he faced that adversity. And you go on that. And they're like, oh, that's what happens. When you can share a real story about somebody that they admire or they even envy where they've gotten and how they want to be like that. You can do that, or you can show them the adversity that somebody like LeBron or somebody in the challenges that they faced growing up in the suburbs of Akron and that kind of stuff and everything else. And look at how he's taken that situation and turned it into something, and how he's now giving back to that area so much with and creating the schools for those impoverished children and everything else. You know, I try to rate real life situations that I know these kids can at least relate to, or where they admire the person involved. And I try to do that, because as soon as I can make that connection with a kid, then they understand that I'm invested in them. And so
How
that's where I take everything.
how do you think sports with students particularly like sports enhance or impact their educational, like their academic progress and their background?
I think sports, the only thing that I think is equally essential to sports are the fine arts. I think those are two areas that we and as educators have to stand up and be like, we need to not neglect these two areas at all, because the lessons that are learned on the sports fields and courts, the lessons that are learned in band and music and art and everything else that are not curricular, so to speak, as far as the four core courses go, are immense. That they go hand in hand, though. The problem solving, the communication skills, the the ability to work and collaborate with each other. These are all things that we say every day that we want our students in our classroom to be
Yep.
able to do. Well, that's exactly what you're teaching five kids on the offensive line to do. How are you going to adjust to a situation that's presented in front of you by the defense? How are you going to communicate with one another to solve that? And how are you going to adjust whatever play you called to block it in the split second? How are you going to do that? Well, that's the same thing as handing them a math problem and asking them to try to solve that. It's just done in a different way. So, why are we not focusing on trying to support these kind of situations in the same way? And those are the kind of things that I am a big proponent of. I'm very fortunate to have worked with Brandon Taylor, who was the teacher of the year last year in Gaston County. He's a proponent from the art standpoint. So I mean, just a big shout out, real quick, to Gaston County schools keeping that up. I'm proud of being that over here, doing that stuff. So that's the thing for us. Keep those things going, because the little things, and it's one of the things that I preached a long time as one of my favorite quotes. It's the little details that are the important. John Wooden said it. Little details mean everything. Little things make big things happen. If I can teach a kid to do the little things, then ultimately he's going to make a big thing happen somewhere down the line.
Let's talk about your impact now from coaching and also in the classroom. What's a specific example you can give me of like a student where you saw them grow either academically or athletically because of you coaching or teaching?
There are numerous ones that I could sit here and name off to you, but by far, um, and I'll be honest, it's bringing tears to my eyes. Um, Several years ago, uh, when I was coaching in middle school in Charlotte, uh, and this young man arrived at our middle school in the sixth grade, and uh, his name was Quavaris, and he was a ball of energy and very much of a troublemaker. And when he arrived in the sixth grade, I was teaching eighth grade, and I was the head football coach. And the one of the assistant principals came to me and said that she would like for me to mentor Quavaris because he had some difficulties staying out of trouble and staying focused on what was supposed to be focused. So we had a meeting with Quavaris's grandmother because that's who he lived with because his family life was not the best that it could possibly have been. And so very early on in his sixth grade year, we got to know each other very well because Quavaris would spend several days a week visiting me in my classroom. And the first year of middle school for him was very difficult. And in Charlotte Mecklenburg, sixth graders could not participate in sports. But he did get to come and visit me during, or he would come to football games and he would stand on the sidelines and help out as a manager in certain aspects and everything. And he came to basketball, which I coached, and so he was around it. And he played rec ball, and his grandmother was very appreciative. So when we get to the seventh grade year, Kovaris started playing football, and Kovaris was an excellent athlete, and his grades started to prosper. And so for the next 2 years, while Kovaris was at Southwest Middle School with me, um, it was nice to see this young man really start to get it together and hold on. And when Kovaris left to go to high school, he promised me he was never going to forget me. He would never forget how much I had helped him in those 3 years. And middle school to high school is a big transition, and I see hundreds of kids and that and everything. But Kovaris was one of those kids that didn't forget me. He came back and visited every year, all the time, several times a year. He would come visit. He would come back and watch football games when he had the opportunity on all that and everything else. Well, Kovaris was more than just your really good athlete. He was the number one running back in the state of North Carolina his junior and senior year. And Kovaris was being highly recruited. He had always been very athletic. The concern was always that he was going to waste it on academics and everything else. But he managed to keep it together. And Kovaris was down to his final months of high school, and he was being recruited by several big name schools at the D1 level. He was being recruited by Tennessee and uh, Alabama and Clemson and everything. And as a proud Clemson alumni, I have season tickets and everything. And we went to my then new wife, and I went to a Clemson game, and it was there that I happened to run into Kovaris on one of his trips. And he met my wife for the very first time, and we were talking and everything else. And it was at this moment that changed my perspective on everything I'd ever done in my coaching career. Kovaris looked at my wife and said to her, Miss Murray, I want you to understand that nothing that I'm doing right now, not all of these college visits, not any of this recruitment, not any of this happens if your husband hadn't taken the time and the patience to help me when I was a sixth grader.
That's a cool story.
And that that's the reason that anytime that I'm not even feeling like it, anytime that I'm questioning why I teach or why I coach or anything else, I have a picture in my phone from that day of me and Quavaris. All I got to do is look at that picture. That's the right reason why. He played 2 years at Tennessee. He went to Michigan State and he played his last 2 years. And he's now a very successful young man with a college degree. That when I met him, there was a question if he'd ever graduate high school. That's why I coach. That's
That's
why I
awesome.
teach for those men.
That's a cool story. That's very awesome. How do you connect with kids that, especially like I deal with this too in elementary school, but how do you connect with kids who struggle with self confidence? Like, what's your, how do you motivate them?
Um, Really, I try to first and foremost, I try to make sure that every kid that I come in contact with or coach feels like they're special, and they had that, and I try to create that one-on-one relationship with all of them, whether they are the best student with the best discipline action or they're the ones that struggle. I take a couple minutes of every practice to try to talk to every kid on my team. I take time in my classes to do the same thing. How's it going? What's your day like? And those kind of things. So even those ones that are shy and struggling with self confidence and everything, I try to build them up along those ways. When I got a kid that's looking at me and telling me they can't do something, the first rule on any of my teams is we don't use the word can't. Can't is not an
Yeah.
answer. If you're out there playing or trying, can is you can do it. The question is, will you do it, or are you willing to do it? Those are the differences. So once you start to encourage people, I tend to find, and I have found in my years of coaching, that once you start to give them that support, once you personally start to remove the doubt of no, you are capable of doing this. I believe that you can do this. I know that you don't think you can do this, but I know you can do this, and I'm going to be right here to do this. Then you start to see those things. Same thing happens in the classroom. I know you can make solve that problem, and I'm going to stand here with you while you solve that problem. And we're going to solve this problem together, but you're going to do most of the work. I'm going to watch you run this mile. I know you can run this mile. You don't think you can run this mile as fast as you can, but I believe you can. Very little difference. The only thing that really changes is the words or environment that it's happening in, which honestly is why my job is very easy. Uh, it's just a matter of what I say and where I say it.
What's one of the toughest challenges you faced either as a coach or as an educator, and how do you navigate through that challenge?
Um, Probably the biggest challenge I have faced over the years was lack of support and lack of funding from districts, particularly with certain sports or at certain times, and their lack of understanding of just how critically important athletics is. I mean, the statistics are out there. The data shows just how imperative athletics is to the success of students in the classroom. People that are students that are involved in athletics consistently are so much more prepared and are better performing in academically. Now, is that because they feel the pressure and they're being forced or whatever to do the work because they want to stay eligible? Maybe, but sometimes that's what it takes to get some of these kids over that hump. Kovaris is a perfect example. He wasn't wanting to do any of that stuff, but he had something that he was wanting to do, and there was had to be that balance. Some of those kids need that motivation. We all need a motivation at times to do
Yep.
something. There's nothing wrong with that.
All right, let's do a little rapid fire. Favorite sports movie, and why is it your favorite sports movie?
Bull Durham.
Yeah,
I
good one.
just think it by far the best sport movie, and I think Kevin Costner teaching Nuke about something is kind of the essence of life. The older generation giving it to the younger generation.
If you could coach one professional sports team, what would it be?
Ooh, one professional. Honestly, if I could coach one professional sports team, I would love to coach the Dallas Cowboys.
Are you a you a Cowboy fan?
It's not necessarily that I'm a huge Cowboys fan, but the prestige of that organization, its longevity, and everything else. And by God, I think I could probably do a better job than what's going on right now.
Um, I think there's a lot of people who definitely feel that way for sure. What's a
Well, you know,
go-to? Yeah, what's a go-to quote for you or a mantra that you kind of live by?
well, I have a I my kids would tell you that I'm a walking book of quotes. Um, Jeez, loads. You know what? I also taught history for years and years and years, and I want to get this one right, so I made sure I wrote it down. And I have two. I told you earlier that I always go back to the Michael Jordan quote.
Yep.
So my favorite. My favorite quote from him is this: I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game winning shot and I missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed. So that is by far one of my favorite, if not my favorite quotes in that. Because again, I believe that the only way you can be truly successful is to have failed.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. I think you have to fail in order to see, like, to make an impact in your life. Like, you have to make the
Right.
changes. Like, I mean, that's why it's like I think even like with sports too, like these teams that go undefeated, it's like you have to lose so you can win that Super Bowl. I mean, look at the Patriots back in '07. It's just like that's it's like you
Oh yeah.
have to like you got to get that loss out of
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah. Like I said, the other that's it. And I usually follow that one up with Winston Churchill, who said that success is not fatal and failure is not final, but it's the courage to continue that is the success.
Nice. When you were in college, did you have any pregame rituals or even high school?
Uh well, I always got taped by the same trainer. I always uh wore the exact same wristbands in the same spot, same eye black. I mean, this actually started in high school. Um, Socks were at the right length, everything. I always got my hair cut by the same stylist on Friday. She shaved well, and I mean, and remember, this was I'm gonna show my age. This was the late '80s, early '90s. So she shaved the same tiger paw in my head every day, every Friday before the game. Um, so yeah, I had some weird, strange rituals, and then of course, I still have that strange. We had that strange ritual of we had to stand at the top of the hill and rub that rock and run down that hill.
Do you have any like post game celebration meals? And it doesn't even have to be celebration like you won, just like celebration in general. Anything that you eat after a game?
Um, Generally, after we have had a good meet or a successful event, um, I will when I get home. My wife and I will go have a nice quiet meal somewhere because generally it's been such a preparation period leading up to that that she and I haven't seen a lot of each other because I've been so invested. So we'll generally go have probably a nice steak dinner somewhere, just the two of us, so that I can decompress and kind of. She's a runner too, so I can decompress and bounce some things off of her. And let me just say uh, that probably the one of the most important things to being a successful coach is having somebody as your support system as a partner, whether it's an assistant coach, which I've had some great ones over the years that I'm an okay head coach, but I've had some fantastic assistants or a partner at home or a friend or whatever that you can bounce stuff off because you can't do this job alone. That's for sure.
So That's a perfect way for me to go to my next question for you, which is what advice do you have for people that are aspiring to become coaches and then I guess slash educators also?
One, there's no such thing as stealing. We are all sharing ideas. So collaborate, 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 collaborate. Um, you can never study or learn too much about your sport or sports. Um, Never be afraid to ask if you have a question. Um, and I have made it a business of making friends with officials. And that's not necessarily because to get a call in your favor at later, but they can teach you a lot about the game. Um, that from their aspect, and the more you can know about it from their aspect, the better you can coach your kids on how to play the game in a way that they won't get the penalty called, um, which is something I learned. Now, from an educator standpoint, the best advice I give anybody ever is there are three people that you need to be friends with in a school building. That's the secretary, the custodian, and the head of the cafeteria. Those are the three people that run the building. So once you make friends with those people, you will be taken care of. Everybody else is there to do the same job you are. So listen and talk to them, but make friends with those three people.
I agree with that for sure. All right. So I originally asked you what your goal was coming out of high school, get into college. Now, what's the goal for Coach Murray where you are in your life right now? What's the end goal?
Well, early in my career, I had was the athletic director of the middle school I was, and everything else. My goal at this point, with about 7 or 8 years left, is that I would like to teach for probably 3 or 4 more years. But I have my administrator's license and I have an athletic administrative degree, and I would like to find myself in a position in the next 5 or 6 years into a high school athletic director's job. And I would like to sit in that position until I finally decide to hang them up in, around the age of 70 or so. And I would teach one class a day and work with kids from that aspect. Maybe coach one easy sport and then ride off into the sunset somewhere with my beautiful wife.